Yes, Coeur d'Alene. It's a beautiful day up here. We're got a little bit of snow for the first time this year. Good to see you, Anthony, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat about one of my favorite hobbies.
A little bit of early snow up there, huh?
Yeah, it is a little early this year.
Well, that's good. We always enjoy a little bit of extra early weather. Now, you've been going around and doing these presentations for how many years now?
Well, I actually did presentations only after I had studied the subject for several years. So I think the first presentation I gave was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I've actually been looking at the data as a hobby because my profession has me studying data a lot, flight test data. And I also notice other people that process and use flight test data. Some of them use it to sell airplanes. I've known for a long time that if you have the more data you have, the easier it is to make any point you want to make. So because of that, I thought, well, this would be a target-rich environment. Let me look at what's actually being done with the climate data. So that was my interest. I want to say up front, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not going to be able to discuss or want to discuss things like the equations that are in the climate models that are predicting warming and so on. But I look at a lot of data. I see what it shows when you look at all the data. I then try to understand on why certain data is better than others or more reliable. And then I also have looked at how the data has been displayed and argued by the alarmists. And that's where I got really alarmed when I started looking at it, because there's some real eye openers there. And that's what really held my interest is to watch how they're dealing with the same data that everybody else has.
Bert, let me ask you, you at one time, perhaps earlier, before you started looking at the data, were you what I would describe as a believer in that carbon dioxide was the real driver of all of these problems that are being proclaimed?
I had absolutely no idea whether carbon dioxide was a driver. I did know, and I have known for some time, and everyone who's taken science in high school knows that carbon dioxide is plant food. It certainly is not a pollutant like the particulate pollutants. I am kind of surprised when I see it being treated as a pollutant when it's not. It's the food of our plants. So that kind of bothered me a little bit. But I didn't give a talk about this until I had done an enormous amount of research on it. And I, aerospace has been my big deal, developing 45 new airplane types, the round the world Voyager and Spaceship One, the first private manned space program. They're the biggies that people learn about me, but I've actually developed one new airplane type, not just another production airplane, but one new airplane type every year for 46 years. So that's a big. But during all of that, I've always had a hobby, and this was one of my hobbies.
I understand that. At one airplane a year output, that's quite impressive. And I would imagine Kelly Johnson would even be very proud of that kind of an output.
John's my hero, of course. He did some phenomenal things for this country.
Yes, he did.
In
Okay.
fact, I are one of or two of three people that have two Collier trophies. That's the big aerospace award. Glenn Curtis has the other one, so I'm the only one alive that has two Colliers.
That's quite an impressive thing. Okay, as I understand it, you have a presentation for us that is part of your whole data presentation and research that you've done. So without further ado, let me turn that over to you, and you can go ahead and start doing that
Okay,
presentation.
I'm looking at the first slide here, Andrew, and I hope the audience can see it.
It's up
This is
now.
this is the first slide of more than 100 slides that I use to study and present this. And the few talks that I have given on it have gone anywhere from an hour and a half to 3 hours. So So doing this in a very short period of time, you're going to see a lot of this flashcarded. In other words, I left some slides in. There's a small subset of the slides, but I left some slides in order to show you the depth of the data rather than have you focus and understand every slide. So that's why you'll see it, a few of them flashcarded, so to speak. I want to point out, if you are interested in looking at all 100+ slides, just Google Burt Rutan climate change or Burt Rutan global warming, and it comes right up on the first page.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go to the next slide. I want to start off by zooming out here and looking at the Earth, and I've cherry-picked some data by showing a photo of enormous amounts of deserts. In the middle of this photo, Mediterranean on the left there, in the middle of this photo used to be the most fertile portion on the Earth, and now it's all desert. I want to point out that when the dinosaurs roamed, there were no big extensive deserts. The Earth was green pole to pole, and the atmospheric content of CO2, carbon dioxide, was between 6 and 8 times what it is now. 6 or 8% higher, but 6 or 8 times what it is now. So I like to start to show people this just to give them an impression that hey, carbon dioxide really is our friend, and we have been at risk of having too low a carbon dioxide. In fact, at one point, it got down to 180 parts per million, and below 150 parts per million, all plants die. So we would have lost all of the land, plants, and animals if it had gone a little lower than it was several million years ago. Okay, let's go to the next slide and show you what kind of attracted me to this. And I'll come back to this slide later, but this is the most famous one that caused the scare. I don't know whether you want to say caused the scare. I think it's better to say this is the most famous chart that folk like Al Gore and others have used in order to provide this alert people to the scare. And what it shows is that the temperature was essentially the same for 1,000 years. My glasses on, I think that's about 1,000 years. And then all of a sudden it jumped up. And I've circled in red here what the current jump is. In other words, this is after humans started burning a lot of fossil fuels. And then, of course, to the right of that, we show all of these predictions of catastrophe in that the Earth's going to get really hot. This particular chart they felt was so compelling. By the way, it's been shown to be fraudulent later, and I don't know if I'll have time to talk about that, but I'm sure other people on this group will. But at any rate, this is the one that was used in full color many times throughout one of the UN reports actually this chart was used to get a Nobel Prize, which is kind of strange. We'll get back to that. Okay, a little bit on my background. I have looked like a green person. I was doing solar hot water in the 70s just because it was fun to do. I built what was called on Popular Science the ultimate energy efficiency house. And there in front of it is my EV1 electric car. And I was one of the last ones for GM to pick up because it was leased. They took it and they crushed it. I am an electric car fanatic because I love the technology. I like the fact that my car is always full in the morning and I never go to a service station. And wow, that's cool.
I've got one too, Burt, so I understand.
However, it doesn't do anything for reducing carbon emissions. You got to count the energy used to crush the car too, and that was created by coal. But at any rate, wrong subject here. But if you research electric cars, you'll find out that they don't reduce carbon emissions at all. Okay. let's look at how massive this challenge is in order to look at a small increase in temperature and to show globally that there may be a scare there. This is a strange chart, and it goes from 0 up to a big number, temperature Fahrenheit. That is the change of the hottest day anywhere on Earth to the coldest day ever anywhere on Earth. So the Earth has had temperatures that are almost 200 degrees different. Okay, now this is just recent stuff. I'm not talking about prehistory. In fact, this is just what happens lately. The next one says the average city, day to night and seasonal. In other words, the coldest day in the winter and the warmest day in the summer for an average U.S. City is more than 100 degrees. Every day, I mean, every year. Okay, now every day, the average city sees a day-night temperature change of 25 to 30 degrees. Okay, the global average temperature, in other words, the average of the whole planet. Now we're not talking day to night. We're just talking about the global average temperature for the last 500,000 years has been about. It's changed by about 20 degrees. Now what that means, in the middle of the big ice age, where we have a mile thick of ice over Europe and North America, all the way to the hottest average temperature of the globe, has changed only about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the temperature change in the next century that the alarmists say has to occur in order to trigger an alarm about there being a problem due to global warming is the next one that's circled in red there. And that's just something like 3 degrees or so. Okay? Now, the temperature change in the last century, I'm talking about global average temperature change in the last century, is that little sliver at the bottom. Okay? Now, that little sliver at the bottom, the entire planet, global average, has changed that much in the last 100 years, even though every city changes 30 degrees every day. So I want to focus on how difficult it is from an engineering standpoint to now take all of this data and to prove what's going on. The challenge, of course, is massive on CO2. They want to tell you, they want the public to think, and they want the politicians and the important folk who make decisions on taxing energy. They want them to think that CO2 is just, there's a lot of it out there. Well, I've taken a big block here, and that represents only the greenhouse gases. And that large block is only 2% of the total atmosphere. So 2% of the total atmosphere is that whole works. The amount of that 2% is the yellow, which is the greenhouse gases. And that little red thing is the CO2 that's caused by humans burning fossil fuels. So we're looking at an absolute tiny effect on greenhouse gases. Next slide. Okay, now we're gonna talk for the first few minutes here only on carbon dioxide, not global warming. So until I tell you, we're talking only about carbon dioxide, not on temperatures.
Got it.
Okay. We're looking at 600 million years now. And of course, looking back that far, we don't have a lot of confidence in the accuracy, but this is the best data available. It was likely 18 times today's concentration, plus or minus probably 5 times, during the Cambrian period when life's diversity was at its greatest expansion. That's that big red circle. It was 4 times the current level when the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid. The only other time that CO2 was as low as it is today in modern times was a period about 300 about 300 million years ago. And you're looking at the black chart right in the middle. See how it got down low, and it's at the same level then as it is in modern times, where it says now. Okay, so we are in a very low CO2 period from the big picture. Do we risk a runaway greenhouse gas warming the planet if CO2 concentration gets a little higher? Well, of course not. Look how high it's always been, and it didn't warm the planet catastrophically then. Next slide. Okay, I'm starting off by showing the alarmist charts. This is one of the most popular ones. They show the concentration of the line on the top is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, parts per million. That's the right chart there, and it's CO2. And then the other one is billions of metric tons of fossil fuels that we burn. In other words, it's our putting what we burn as humans, and they show this to show this correlation. Another scare chart. The alarmists love this one. It shows they want to show a correlation of human emissions to something that's really bad. So they scale the presentation to show that. The one on the left shows the various green. By the way, these greenhouse gases are a small percentage of water vapor, which overwhelms all of them as a greenhouse gas. But over in the right, we show the total carbon emissions, and then we show them for petroleum, coal, gas, and cement. And so they want to give us an idea that there is a hockey stick here. There's something amiss. There's something that we could fix by not burning fossil fuels. The real horrific scare chart, though, is the CO2 that was measured recently, and it's gone up so quickly. You can see that line called the Keeling curve, and then a 10-year projection beyond it. That is what's happened just in the recent 50 years or so, 50 or 100 years on CO2. And the alarmists say, well, look back here, 500,000 years. If we believe that the ice core data is correct, we saw these spikes every 80,000 years, and we're way above those spikes, those natural spikes in CO2. Hey, that's scary, right? Okay, now I'm gonna look at all the data that we've measured with CO2. The chart on the upper left shows two things. First of all, the accurate measurements have only been since we've had the Mauna Loa Observatory and have had precise measurement of CO2 technology. You know, stuff that's 1950, 1960 or so. Now we can really measure it accurately, and we measure it in different parts of the world. By the way, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is about the same all over the planet. So you can measure it in Hawaii, you can measure it in Antarctica and whatever, and it really dissipates nicely. If you look before that, all of the data that was measured on CO2, now these are not with accurate instruments, but I've put a green line through all the data. We don't know how accurate that is, and certainly it's not very accurate. But for what it's worth, I went ahead and fared through that. Okay, now let's look at another measurement, the chemical measurement method, which was available to us back as early as 1810 for measuring CO2 that early, and you get this red data. The black data there is the ice core information. Okay, if I throw those all together, you get a chart that doesn't look as relevant in terms of being caused by the emissions. Okay, let's look back further. Now we're going back 1,800 years. The proxy for CO2 measurement from the stomachial density and fossil pine needles. Now that sounds kind of weird as a proxy, but keep in mind the hockey stick graph that scared everyone. The most important thing in that allowed them to build that chart was the spacing of tree rings. And that is no more confident than this proxy for pine needles, and particularly the fact that when they did that, they used a tiny handful of trees to show the hockey stick. At any rate, this is an accepted scientific measurement of fossil pine needles. Okay, let's throw all of that together, and now here's what we've got. It doesn't look like a hockey stick, does it? Okay, now to put it in perspective, I put down at the bottom all of these data, the chemical measurements, the green, the black is ice core data, and the dash being the early data. And by the way, that little star down there, that's the current CO2. But I wanted to show something to inform rather than to scare.
Burt, which slide are we on right now?
We're on now to put atmospheric CO2 in perspective. Slides.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is a very important slide. You won't see this anywhere. This is a Burt Rutan slide. But, you know, we talk about what is CO2 dangerous. Well, I'm using this slide to show that CO2 atmospheric concentration is not alarming. For example, let's go way at the top at 0.5%. 0.5% of the atmosphere being CO2. That is the maximum that they allow inside a nuclear submarine or at the International Space Station, the people that spend 6 months to a year up there at a time. They don't want it to go over 0.5%. Okay? And our atmospheric concentration is the data way down at the bottom. Okay, now let's go up to 0.1%. See, it says CO2 indoors in an average house. You go indoors in an average house, and the CO2 is 2 or 3 times what it is in the atmosphere. And the reason is you've been in there breathing. Oh, by the way, plants do grow better if you talk to them. You know why? Because you're giving them more CO2 directly. That's true. Okay, now let's go up to this orange line that's kind of the middle. It's 0.28%. That is the average atmosphere CO2 content during the development of plant and animal life on Earth, which is approximately 8 times the current. This is an optimum level for species diversity. It's an optimum level for crop yields, and it's an optimum level for tree growth. So all the guys that love things like diversity of species, crop yields, a green planet, and robust tree growth, that's the CO2 that's perfect. That is the CO2 that is perfect for that. Now, you probably haven't heard that from the news, have you? Okay, the next slide. It says, is CO2 a pollutant? Well, let's look at the lower right and see some bar graphs. If we would double the CO2 that we have now, more than double, up to 600 parts per million, the crop yields of wheat, oranges, orange trees, would go up between 15% and 130% crop yields. You know how many people we'd save from starvation if you could get crop yields that robustly increased? In fact, if you look at the chart on the left, it shows that agriculture productivity increased an average of 34%. Productivity is what you get from growing stuff from 1990 to 2004. That's recent. That's just recent. Agriculture productivity since 1990. We haven't invented new agricultural stuff from them. Since then, agriculture productivity has gone up 34%. And much of that increase was due to the fact that we, by burning fossil fuels, increase the atmospheric CO2. Plants need less water when you have CO2. It has been claimed, and this is a little far out, but it might be true, that about 500 million people are alive today who wouldn't be if carbon dioxide had not risen in the last century. And that's about 7% of the population. And that's on people that would otherwise starve. By the way, when you go to having farmers grow corn for fuel instead of for food, you raise the price of food, and that in itself has had this unintended effect of killing millions of people in Africa. Okay, next slide. This is a chart that I'm going to come back to as I go through the various proofs, but it has 5 things in the box. And the first thing is the question, recent human burning of fossil fuels, did they suddenly and dangerously increase CO2 beyond previous levels? The answer is yes, it increased it beyond previous levels. No question about that. And it was due partially to human emissions. Man did raise the atmospheric CO2. It has increased 20% in the last 50 years. CO2 might now be the highest in the human era. In other words, CO2 is higher than it's ever been since men have walked the earth. However, it's only 0.038% of the atmosphere, and that CO2 is only 3.6 of that is of the greenhouse gases. Okay, let's press on. Next slide shows a comparison for 2 recent warmings. The alarmists like to talk about 1970 to current. 1970 to current, because that's when we really started burning fossil fuels. That's when we had, excuse me, SUVs. That's when we did all this really bad stuff. Well, I've shown on here, by the way, warming and cooling has been cyclic all the time. This business of climate change is kind of a stupid thing to say because climate always changes. I've gone back and cherry-picked another, let's see, how many years is that? 30-year time period, okay, for 1915 to 1945, and I've shown the global average, global average temperature in red, and the green is the CO2 levels, okay? Now, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, we've had a 1.58 degrees C per century on the slope between 1915 and 1945. In other words, that's an alarming slope. The alarmists would say that if you have 1.6 degrees per century, that in a couple hundred years you're going to have a problem. Well, let's look at 1970 to 2000, another 30-year time period. It was the same slope, 1.6 degrees per century. Even though the CO2 growth was tiny in the first period, and it was large in the second period. See the dotted lines there? Okay, global temperatures cooled from 1945 to 70, in between those, even though CO2 rose by 5%. This idea of saying that you have correlation of human emissions with planet temperature is absolutely, totally baseless. No fact at all. I mean, it's baseless. Okay, I promise myself not to use profanity today. This is a tiny bit, just 20 parts per million of CO2. It has a large effect into the atmosphere. It has a large effect on change on the greenhouse warming, in other words, changing the planet's temperature. If you go to the pre-industrial area, where we have right there in the middle 290 parts per million, increasing CO2 gives you a tiny amount of planet warming. And if you go out today, it's almost flat. In other words, adding CO2 now has a tiny effect as it does compared to if putting in the first little bit of CO2.
What you're speaking of is the logarithmic effect, right?
That's right. And bottom line, doubling CO2 does almost nothing, really. I'll talk about that more later. Very quickly here, I'll tell you, I'm going to skip through this because I'm sure all your other guys are going to show that all these climate models have failed to predict. The climate models are a theory based on some assumptions and some equations. And a scientist he proposes theories, but if his theories don't match the data, then he throws them out. What we have here is the models. Every time the climate changes, they go and turn their knobs on the model to make it agree, and then claim that it agrees. That is probably the biggest fraudulent thing that I've seen that's going on. Okay, now here's something that's kind of interesting. I took this local slope that we have of increasing carbon dioxide, and just for the hell of it, I predicted it linearly. Which you say, well, are we going to have a linear increase in burning of fossil fuels? Well, maybe. We certainly have no reason to not suspect that. If we have a linear increase, almost everyone believes that by about 2080, 2080, we will be out of oil, coal, and these what do you call them that you run out of? Not non-renewable. Okay, but we're going to be out of them about then. So you can't keep increasing your emissions if you don't have anything to burn, right? These guys say that we're going. I don't know why they don't want us to burn it all right now, and then we'll have to go to windmills and solar plants. But they seem to be on the other side of that argument too. Just for the hell of it, I showed that. Well, let's go up to 1980 and then do a question mark. Or excuse me, 2080, and then question mark. What do you do after that? What if it went up at the same rate? I'm talking about CO2 percentage. Or what if it went down because you didn't have any more coal or oil to burn? Okay. I just want to point out that if it goes linear increase, it will be 2160. What's that? 150 years from now, until you get to the point of CO2 in the atmosphere at which your crop yields go up 35% and your pine trees growth double. It's going to take us 160 years just to get to what is a small benefit of crop yields and pine tree growth. And of course, way off the chart is when it gets dangerous. Okay, greenhouse CO2 effect is a minor player in global warming. This is something that the scientists will not talk about because they can't model it. The precipitation and cloud formation is the big thermostat that keeps the planet from changing its temperature. You notice how little it changed. I mean, 500,000 years, the global warming average only changed 20 degrees. That's tiny. The reason it does is that the Earth has a thermostat that overwhelms everything else, and that is cloud formation and precipitation. Well, the scientists don't show that in their models because it is too chaotic to model. In other words, it is the epitome of chaos. And when you have something that's chaotic, what chaos means is you can't model it. We don't know why clouds form and why precipitation happens. We can measure it happening, but we can't force it to change. The Pacific heat vent, also, it's observed and it's powerful, but it can't be modeled. So these three effects, precipitation, cloud formation, Pacific heat vent, overwhelm the CO2 warming enormously, but the scientists don't deal with it because they don't have the mathematical tools to model it. Okay, back to this big chart again. Number 2 question, human emissions causes greenhouse warming. The answer is no. It's not likely, and it's definitely not supported by the data. There's no evidence that carbon dioxide emissions are the main cause of the recent global warming. Our main warming cycles are caused by chaotic formation of clouds, precipitation, also solar input variation, not by CO2 greenhouse. Okay, let's press on. Okay, now, from now on, we're going to talk about temperatures, not about CO2. Got it? I'm looking at a chart called Looking Back Millions of Years.
Got it.
Just for the heck of it. Now, how do we know the temperature millions of years ago? Time does not let me do it now, but I've found the only data that we have. And yeah, it's not precise, but it's everything that we have. If you look back 65 million years have changed, current being on the right of that green piece of data there, upper left chart. You'll see that we're right now in a cool period. And we have been for a couple of million years. The planet has been in a cool period for a couple of million years. Got it? Not a hot period. The alarmists, the people who go after their Nobel Prizes, they want you to think that we are in the hottest period ever and it's getting worse and we'll all die. Let me say it again. The planet for the last couple million years has been historically cold. Okay. To runaway greenhouse destruction of our planet would have happened in the, well, that's something else. Let's keep going. Okay, here is a very important chart. I want to first point out that it's backwards. It says the current time at 0 is on the left, and as we go to the right, that's going back in time. Okay, this is the ice core data of the temperature of the planet. So you'll notice that every 85 to 100,000 years, there's a hot period, a little spike. See the black circles? Okay, those black circles are when we have a wonderful planet. In between them, when we spend all this time, 80% of the time down here cold, that's when we have a mile thick of ice over North America and a mile thick of ice over Northern Europe. And the only thing that survives and thrives and creates new species is down near the equator. So the planet thrives where the black circles were. Okay, now let's look at the recent one because it's different. For some reason, we don't know why, it's not due to man because it's a full 11,000 years. For some reason, we are in the most stable period in the last 500,000 years. Instead of a short spike going there, we've had 11,000 years. See that squiggles going up?
What chart are we on now?
More recent global temperature data looking back 400,000 years. Have you had that one up?
Yeah, I've had it up. It's just I thought that you'd advanced. My apologies. Okay, we're on that correct chart now.
See the squiggles? By the way, that's years times 1,000. But that where it sits around 0, where that red circle is, and then moving just to the right of the red circle, that's what I'm focusing on, is that little period of time on the chart. It's only about 4 or 5% or maybe 3% of the whole chart. See where everything is nice and stable? In fact, it's more stable than any other time during the 500,000 years that the chart is. Now, this is wonderful, isn't it? And it's also, when people talk about unprecedented warming, I want to make sure to make the point that every time the planet recovered from the big ice ages, those 4 circles, it was hotter than it has been for the last 11,000 years. Okay, now let's look at the circle, the red circle. Inside of it is a little red line, okay? That red line is the alarm that's being raised by Mr. Gore and others. That little red line is the scare. Does it look scary? Okay, let's go to the next chart. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time on surface measurements. Bottom line, if you really look at those who have done the most professional and accurate studies, the bottom line is surface measurement data is so flawed that it's essentially worthless. Any scientist knows this. He doesn't admit it because he likes to use it if he's going after grants. But the atmospheric measurements from satellites, which we've only had since 1970s, those are the only things that you can really say that what has happened to the global temperatures. Just to make my point on a couple of things here. If you look at the upper right chart, you'll see these little dots, blue dots going along, and about 1989 or so, they go down. That is the number of stations used, okay, to the charts on the bottom, there used to be like 15,000 stations that the scientists would use to determine the planet's surface temperatures. Notice that that collapsed all the way down to 7,000 in just a handful of years. Well, how could we destroy more than half of the measuring stations for planet surface temperature? Well, the reason that happened, and this is interesting, is those are the Siberian Russian ones. The reason they had so many is the Soviets used to pay the outposts for fuel. In other words, they would give them fuel based on how cold they were. Okay, now if you're up in Siberia sometime and you want more fuel or more money to buy fuel, you will probably tell them that you're really cold. Now, notice when the Soviet Union collapsed and they no longer paid those guys fuel for being cold, in fact, then they've stopped measuring it. So we dropped down to only 8,000 to 6,000 measuring stations. And look what happened to the temperature. The temperature is the red bar graphs. All of a sudden, the planet warmed. Gosh, the planet warmed immediately. Does that kind of tell you something? Another thing interesting about this chart is there's a California thing over here in the lower left. If you go to the right of that, you see three different squiggly lines with fairings through them. The one on the bottom that shows almost no warming is the temperatures all throughout California that are in areas in which the population didn't increase much during the last 100 years. Well, the areas where the population increased the most in the last 100 years had warming. Now, what does that mean? It means that you locally warm the area where people are. You have air conditioners which warm plants. You have parking lots which absorb, in other words, when people grow, the measurements that they make indicate global warming that's not really global warming. Okay, let's
Burt,
go
I should
back.
point out that that chart that you're referring to there is from James Goodridge in 1996. It was published in the American Meteorological Society Bulletin, and he was the former state climatologist of California, and he did all this work independently. And that particular graph there is the one that changed my mind about the alarm of global warming. That's when my light bulb came on, when I saw that particular graph.
Clear as a bell, and it's irrefutable. Okay, let's go back to some ice core data. So now we're going to focus on that period that I talked about before. It's only 11,000 years. This is the period after we recovered from the big ice age. Okay, the Russian Vostok ice cores. And by the way, that if you look at the upper right, that little blue line and circle is the present temperature and the last 100 years of warming. You see that blue line and the last 100 years? Does it look scary compared to the last 11,000 years? Of course not. That's why you don't show it in the UN book. Okay, let's look in the bottom. The present temperature and the last century warming is that blue circle and the blue line. That's the scare that they are trying to tell us we need to stop using fossil fuels or pay more for them or use solar panels and wind. That's the scare. It's right there. But look at it with the real data on it. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We're going to look at some proxies. Now, there's other ways to estimate temperature. The last 11,000 years. I notice I'm way over on time, so I'm going to rush here.
That's all right. We've got as much time as you need, Burt.
The last 11,000 year warm period, we're looking at a bunch of proxies here. The Lowell 18 non-tree ring proxies. Again, we're talking, this is the last 2,000 years. Okay, I'll ignore the old IPC report. That's silly. The last 5,000 years, Carter, who put out his report in 2007. Now, keep in mind, the last century of warming is still on that. Okay, I'm going to continue on here and show some other proxies, core sediments of Greenland lakes for 9,000 years, Tibetan Little Ice Age summer temperatures in Tibet determined by forgotten there. That's a C3 chart, by the way. Oh, Austrian caves, stalagmites, upper right. By the way, there's about almost 1,000 of these different proxies. I'm just showing a few of them that I was able to find when I first started studying this. Tree rings from Pakistan mountains. Okay, I'm New Zealand caves, sedimentary cores down the bottom left, sedimentary cores in the Arctic Circle regions. Top right, multiple proxies with the Canadian ice fields. Bottom right, New Zealand cave data. In other words, sedimentary. I'm just looking at a whole bunch of data here on showing what the temperature likely was. Okay, now I've thrown them all together. We're going to stay a little time on this chart because I just absolutely love this chart. Just for the hell of it, I'm going to go forward to the hockey stick chart. You go forward one more. It says my introduction to global warming scare. You got that one up?
I do.
Okay, now this was the second or third chart that I showed. This is the chart that was used and its predictions beyond that red thing to scare the world into global warming. This is the only chart that is understood and promoted by the media, right? It's the biggie. Let's go back now to the chart just before it, where it says, I'll bet you've never seen these charts.
Got it?
Okay. Well, there is all the data, people. The last 10,000 years, some of it's the last couple thousand, some of it's 5,000. I've thrown all the data in from the Lohr study, from the Carter data, from the historical record, from the Greenland ice cores and the Austrian cave stalagmites, and I've thrown them all together into this big mishmash. Now, is that scary? You have to look very close to see the last 100 years of warming, which is the scare that they try to show there at the hockey stick, and then I'm going back to that. Well, I guess you weren't able to follow that. But anyway, here is all the data. It shows that the warmest period was 8,000 years ago. It shows that we were much warmer than today at the Minoan warming, which was in about 3,000 years ago, and the Roman warming, which was about 2,000 years ago, and the medieval warming, which was about 800, 900 years ago. I'm looking there at the top chart at the light blue. See those peaks? Running from the first with a red circle is the peak 8,000 years ago, going right to the middle of it, the Minoan warming, and then to the right of that we had a peak which was called Roman warming, and then medieval warming 800 or 900 years ago, and then all this other stuff is other proxy measurements. And hidden down inside there is a red circle, and it shows the last 100 years, the last century of warming that is being blamed on fossil fuels. Does this chart scare? No, this chart informs. Okay, next slide. Okay, we've gone back to the hockey stick. Let's keep going. Okay, now I want to talk about statistical significance of warming data, of temperature data. We've gone back into the ice age. This is 16,000 years ago. A there is that straight line that goes from 16,000 years to the present time. You take all the data and you fare a linear curve through it, and that is statistical significant in that it says it has, in the last 16,000 years, it has warmed on the average to that slope, right? Okay, that is a statistical significance that you can take to the bank. Okay, the next one's called B, and that's that descending line is being cooler as it over the last 10,000 years. The planet has cooled a little bit. See how it goes downhill a little bit? You got that B square and the line going downhill to the present time on the right. That is statistically significant, and it says that it has cooled by that slope the last 10,000 years. Okay, now see the yellow part? I'm going to focus in on that yellow square, and that's the entire chart down on the bottom. So now we're looking at the bottom chart, which is 2,000 years long. Okay, C is the last 2,000 years we call the Christian era, and it shows the planet has cooled during that time period to the present. That is statistically significant that it has cooled in the last 2,000 years. Now, D is the last 700 years, and that's the recovery from the Little Ice Age. And you can make a somewhat statistical significance out of the fact that we had this temperature change in the last 700 years. Okay, now E, though, is what all the climate alarmists talk about. That's what they put their whole conclusions and their proof of their models and their proof that there's a scare about. And that is the last 100 years. Okay, now look at E. There's a slope that they've drawn through it, the little red line. Okay, we're talking about just 100 years now, that little sliver above the E block. However, what's really hurting them is the last 16 years it didn't warm at all. The planet actually cooled in the last 16 years.
16,000, you mean?
So it really, what's that?
16,000, you mean?
Oh, no. The last 16 years, the planet has cooled, not warmed.
Oh, you're talking about the current temperature, the instrumental data.
Sure. As measured by ground and satellites, the temperature has not warmed in the planet for the last 16 years. Right? Since about 1996 or so, it's been flat. Okay. So that, however, they draw a line through this and want to talk about that this is a concern that we can project. However, any statistician will tell you, by looking at all of this data, is that all of these trends, except the last 100 years, are statistically significant. However, trend E is what the alarmists forecast to prove correlation with human emissions, and it's not statistically significant because of all the hash of the data, and particularly since the last 16 years flattened out. Okay, back to this square again. Did we have dangerous sudden global warming occurred in the last 50 years? The answer is no. When corrected for local urban warming of sensors and the Soviet site issues, there was no unusual global surface warming. Atmospheric measurements also show nothing to indicate warming alarm. The atmospheric measurements show that the planet has warmed, just like it has warmed in the years before burning of fossil fuels. There is nothing to show alarm. Okay, I'm going to, you know, the fact that we had this big hurricane that caused so much trouble a couple of weeks ago, a lot of people are trying to blame that on global warming. Well, if you go back and look, you'll find much worse. I mean, we're talking about 20,000 people dying from that earlier hurricanes and so on. That's all bogus. You don't see much on it because of climate. The real scientists don't say that's due to global warming. I'm going to just flashcard this to show that these unusual events that we look at aren't due to the global warming. Okay, extreme events cause deaths. In other words, extreme planet events, this is the upper left chart, that's all downhill. The deaths caused by extreme events is all downhill. We don't have any hockey stick going on there. Of course, one of the reasons that the extreme events caused more death in the past is we didn't have very good doctors then, right? Well, of course, that'll reverse after Obamacare gets all the way in because all the doctors will quit. But that's a joke. Actually, that was tongue in cheek. Okay, let's look at the upper right. Tornadoes are down. lower left, flood fatalities are down, lightning deaths are down. Let's go to the next slide, calls show me the data 2, human emissions cause of disaster. Hurricanes per decade are down. Sandividia's severe storms are down. Cyclone intensities are down. Cyclone energy, it's the lowest in 33 years, cyclone energy. Let's go to the next slide, which is human CO2 emissions cause disaster. Show me the data number 3. You have that one up now?
Yes.
Show me data 3. Droughts and floods have been stable. There was no change. If you look at the upper right, precipitation modulates the temperature changes. As precipitation goes up, temperature comes down. Okay, let's go to the lower left. Glacier shortening. You know all this deal about glaciers being shortened due to global warming and due to emissions from humans? Well, look at the red line first. There's the emissions, almost flat until you get to about 1940, and then it goes up, right? See the emission chart, the red line on the lower left? Okay, well, let's look at glacier shortening, the 180-year trend. It's the same for 180 years, even though you've got a hockey stick in the burning of coal and fossil fuels. So to blame glacier shortening on burning of fossil fuels is no correlation at all. In fact, a correlation disproves it. Of course, the reason that they're shortening is we're still recovering from the little ice age.
We got about 3 minutes, Burt.
Okay, 3 minutes. Okay, the current temperature is too hot and further warming is bad. The answer there is, excuse me. Okay, my conclusion. Will warming and increase in CO2 be good? Yes. Is the current temperature perfect? Unlikely. Who says the current temperature is perfect? You can prove by a number of things, particularly feeding the planet and starvation and growth of species. You can prove that it'd be better if we were warmer. Okay, I've got to run here. I'm going to skip the next one. Cheaper to constrain than adapt. Let's go down to scientists' consensus. This is a beauty here. Do you have the scientist consensus thing with the blue bar?
Yes, I do.
Okay, the claim is 2,500 UN IPCC scientists agree that humans are causing climate crisis. Well, let's look at that. 2,500. 600 of those were involved in the working group that even addressed global warming. 308 of those offered comments and recommendations in the report conclusion. 32 of those commented on more than 3 of the chapters, and only 5 of them commented on the full report. Okay? Now, the claim that greenhouse gas, by the way, this was hard data to get. What this was the comments from the in-house scientists reviewers of the UN report before it went out. It was like pulling teeth to get their own comments from their own scientists. When you got it out, you see some alarming stuff. Okay, let's look at the bottom. There's claim hundreds of IPCC scientists agree that greenhouse gas caused recent warming. Greenhouse gas caused recent warming. Okay, that's the claim. In the last 50 years, greenhouse gas caused recent warming, right? I put 200. They just say hundreds of scientists agree. Okay, 62 of them reviewed the chapter where that statement appeared. 37 of the reviewer comments were rejected by the IPCC editors. In other words, of those 62, 37 of them, the editors of the report rejected the comments. That's weird. 55 of the reviewers had serious vested interests. In other words, if that were true, they'll get grants, etc. So people that only 7 scientists were impartial reviewers with no vested interest who actually reviewed data to show that greenhouse gas caused most of the global warming in the last 7 years. Only Only 7 out of 2,500 were unvested and reviewed and commented on the claim. For God's sake, what's going on here? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Of those 7 IPC impartial scientists that coordinated and commented on the statement that greenhouse gas caused the recent warming, 2 of those 7 accepted interviews. One of them, Dr. Ross McKendry. A category statement like this is not supported by the evidence in the IPCC report. Wow. Of the 7, okay. Now, the other guy who would accept interviews, Dr. Vincent Gray of New Zealand. Typical IPCC double talk. The text of the IPCC report shows that this is decided by a guess from persons with a conflict of interest, not from a tested model. Now, consensus bullshit. I hate to use that word, but look at the quote at the bottom. It's wonderful. This is from Carol Browner, Director of White House Office of Energy and Climate Change Policy. Quote, I'm sticking with the 2,500 scientists. Okay, I'm going to close there. I've got a bunch more slides, but I've run way over.
Okay. Well, that's quite a presentation that you've given there, Burt. You know, lots of people want us to do something about climate change or global warming, and they want us to be more energy efficient. And I don't think energy efficiency is necessarily a bad thing, and I think you'd probably agree with that. But given what we've
doing efficient things, efficient houses, efficient cars, efficient airplanes.
Yeah.
That's been my
what would be your best path forward if you could say, all right, let's kind of put this alarm aside and let's just focus on something pragmatic? What would that be?
The best path forward is to be honest and show the data to everyone. The funding for climate science has gone up by a factor, not percent, a factor of 80 or 90 since the early 90s. When money flows to your industry, 80 times as much as it was just 20 or 30 years ago, you got to be biased. And it's so easy to be biased when you have millions of data points to pick from. I think what's going to happen here, first of all, as we go further into this, as my good friend Lovelock, the biggest alarmist of all, when he first sent me an email, he says, Burt, this fraud is nothing compared to the fraud during the ozone hole scare. And he was the one that developed the instruments to measure the ozone hole scare. And when they get private with you, they are honest, but that's not when they're looking for grant money. I think what needs to happen is well, first of all, it is collapsing because the warming stopped. Okay, and what's happening now, like they did after the ozone hole scare, is they still try to make people think that it was CFCs. Okay, and their whole reputation, not just individually, but the reputation of them as scientists, is based on them having a soft exit from this rather than a hard fall, and the media is helping them with that. They know they're wrong, but they want a soft exit and they want to go out quietly.
Burt, do you think there's any way that they could climb down from this any way gracefully? I noticed that Lovelock has climbed down from this, but he did it kind of abruptly. Is there any way for them to climb down from this position that you can see?
You know what might happen? Folk like Gore, when this all becomes, just a matter of time, this all becomes known as fraudulent. They're going to be looking for scapegoats. They say, well, it's not my fault. These scientists told me that. And the scientists who have been unethical are the ones that I think will take the fall. They're the ones that will be the scapegoats. It won't be Gore, and it won't be the Obama or the Europeans and Germans and the Spaniards who've taxed their energy and so on. They were just acting at the behest of people that were trying to prove their models. I don't know what can happen here. First of all, you don't hear about the old scares. And by the way, if you go back to that ice core thing, our big risk is falling into the next big ice age. It's way overdue, and it's really the bad stuff. It's cold, not hot. There is no way this planet is going to be too hot, have any kind of danger because it's too hot. The danger has always been that 80 or 90% of the time it's way too cold to support the population.
Any final word that you might have for us, Burt, before we close?
Say that I haven't updated my presentation in 2 years, particularly after those emails that came out where it clearly showed that these guys were fraudulent. I don't know why people didn't go to jail on that, but you leave it to somebody else to figure that out. But after those emails came out, I realized that it doesn't need a Burt Rutan to show that this is wrong. And I went back to airplanes and spaceships, which is what I'm doing now. I haven't updated this presentation in almost 2 years, and I follow it only a little bit once in a while. The wonderful stuff that you have on the what's up with that, and I look at C3, and once in a while just to see. I get emails on it that I browse, but I don't send stuff out to the long list of an email list on global warming that I used to do. I just don't feel that's needed anymore, and mainly because the threat of us having things like cap and trade to trash our economy was that threat is gone.
Okay, Burt. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been a great honor to have you here on WWT, and we wish you well in your new retirement up there in Coeur d'Alene. And of course, you're not really retired. You're working on all kinds of new projects. We hear a new plane this year, a new plane design. So we'll look forward to seeing that. But again, thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your patience and all of the presentation that you made. And this, of course, will be recorded and available on the website in a couple of days, and we'll be able to analyze it further then. Again, thank you for being with us, and good day.